There are seasons in marriage and family life where nobody is doing anything terribly wrong. Look, sometimes you're just tired. You're depleted. She's depleted. The kids, they still need things, right? They always still need things. Work still needs things. Work still needs to get done. Dinner still needs to get made. Laundry. Oh my goodness, all the laundry still needs to get washed and dried and folded. And by the end of the day, it can feel like there's just not enough left in either of you to be kind, patient, or emotionally present. Hi, I'm Dan Hayden, and this is the Positive Legacy Podcast for Christian Fathers. This week's episode is titled When You're Both Running on Empty. Again, this is part two of a four-part series I'm calling Leading at Home Under Pressure. And I want to start this one off from a place that feels just raw and honest, because that's where a lot of couples really are these days. Sometimes the hardest part of family life is not a major crisis. It's the ordinary accumulation of fatigue, of just depletion. It's coming home from work already spent and realizing, oh no, she's exhausted too. It's being the stay-at-home parent all day and feeling just touched and overstimulated and unseen by the time your spouse walks in. It's both of you working full time and trying to act like the evening shift is somehow supposed to run on fumes and goodwill. And to be honest, sometimes there's not a lot of either of those left. It's carrying that provider pressure or that parenting pressure, scheduling pressure, and that relationship pressure all at once. And when both of you are running on empty, it becomes very easy to start treating each other like the problem. Not necessarily out loud, right? And we've all done this. It's just sometimes it's internally. She doesn't see how much I'm carrying. Gosh, he has no idea what this day has been like. Why am I the only one, thinking ahead? Why do I have to ask for everything? Ooh, I've got nothing left. And apparently that still isn't enough. That is the emotional terrain that I want us to walk today, because depletion by itself is not failure, but unexamined depletion can quietly turn teammates into opponents. And that's what we want to prevent. Now, my current family setup is a little different than a lot of men that I coach. As many of you know, I retired from the Army a few years ago. I work part-time from home, part-time, kind of full-time. I love what I do, as you all know. But my wife re-entered the workforce full-time right about the same time that I retired. So our roles shifted pretty dramatically and pretty suddenly. But a lot of the dads I coach, they're in more of a typical arrangement where they're working full time and their wives are either also working full time or they're homeschooling their kids or, they're at home with multiple young kids. So I don't want to pretend that my family's rhythms right now in our lives are exactly the same. But I do think that role shift gave me a real appreciation for something I used to understand more in theory than experientially, right? I often joke that being a stay-at-home dad, it's a lot harder when the kids are actually at home. Summers are brutal. I'm like, yeah, I'm a stay-at-home dad, but the kids are here. That's just tough. But underneath that joke is actual, it's genuine respect, because it's also a credit to my wife, who was a stay-at-home mom for a lot of years when our kids, they weren't yet of school age. And that wasn't just regular stay-at-home parenting pressure either. During some of those years, I deployed to Afghanistan while the kids were still really young. Right. I deployed when Abby and Bridget were about 3 and Hannah was like 4 months old, and then deployed again later when Abby and Bridget were 9 and Hannah was 6 and Billy was 3. So Holly wasn't just managing diapers and naps and routines and just the relentlessness of little kids. She was carrying all of that while also carrying the stress and uncertainty and the weight of me being gone. She was in the Army. She understood the sort of, operating environment that I was in, but living closer to the demands of home in a different way gave me even more appreciation for what she had carried for so long. And that matters because one of the first things that depletion does is narrow your empathy. When you're tired, you see your own burden more clearly than anyone else's. And look, that's just human. And if you don't watch it, your fatigue starts telling a story where you're the only one carrying something hard. That story is also never fully true. One of the sayings that Holly and I, used to come back to, especially when the kids were younger, during those really just exhausting seasons, when we were openly questioning ourselves, not each other, right? But the question we would always come back to, or statements we would make, something akin to, huh, I don't know how we're going to get through this, but you know what? We don't have a choice. Now, that could sound bleak if you hear it the wrong way. That could sound real sort of fatalistic, right? But for us, it wasn't that. It wasn't hopelessness. It was clarity. It was our way of saying to each other, we may not know exactly how to do this well right now. We may be tired. In fact, we are tired. We may not have the answers tonight, but we are still in this together. And quitting on each other is not an option. That's just not on the table. That's a very different posture than blame. And honestly, I think a lot of couples need a phrase like that, not because it solves exhaustion, because we didn't magically become re-energized, right? But because it helps name the commitment underneath it. Now, one of the things I see over and over in coaching is that when men feel that pressure of being the provider, they often assume their exhaustion, should be self-explanatory. They think to themselves, of course I'm tired. I've been carrying work and finance pressure and uncertainty and expectations, and all of that's real. But what often gets missed is that your wife may be carrying an entirely different kind of depletion that is just as real. Maybe it's repetitive. Maybe it's invisible. Maybe it's domestic. Maybe it's emotional. Maybe it's the fact that she hasn't interacted with a, large human being in quite some time. Maybe it's the relentlessness of young kids or the administrative load of older kids. The forms are different. The depletion is not. And if you are both depleted in different languages, you can start misreading each other pretty badly. He sees her frustration and hears criticism. She thinks his withdrawal, she sees his withdrawal and hears indifference. He thinks, I'm trying, and she thinks, I'm drowning. He thinks, I just need a minute. But what she hears from that is, sorry, babe, you're on your own. That's where team language starts breaking down. And if that dynamic is familiar, trust me, you're not alone. This is one of the most common things dads bring into coaching is how to stay allied with their wife when both of them feel just maxed out and neither has much margin left. So let's talk about what tends to go wrong first. I think one of the biggest mistakes couples make when they're both running on empty is assuming that the most depleted person is automatically the most overburdened person. That becomes a competition. Trust me, nobody is going to win. That is a lose-lose every single time. Who had the harder day? Who is more tired? Who deserves to tap out? Who did more today? Who has less left in the tank? That scoring system will crush a marriage over time. Because once you start measuring each other competitively, you stop serving each other creatively. The better question is not who wins the exhaustion contest, because we both lose that one. Trust me, we're both exhausted. The better question is, what do we as a team, what does our team need right now? And that is a totally different posture. And it requires both honesty and humility. Honesty says, I'm running low. I don't have much margin tonight. I am more irritable than I want to be. Humility says, my depletion is real, but it is not the only depletion in this house. Humility says, my wife may be carrying something I completely underestimating. And lastly, humility can say, hey, I may not be seeing clearly if all I can see is my own fatigue. Those two things together, honesty and humility, can change a lot. And honestly, this is one of the reasons I think so many dads need support from outside the house. When you're deep in the pressure, it's hard to see your own blind spots. And coaching helps slow that down so you can lead with more clarity instead of just reacting from fatigue. Now, let's make this practical. When both of you are running on empty, I think there are three things that matter a lot: naming the reality, protecting that alliance, and simplifying the moment. So first, name that reality. A lot of couples never say the truest thing in the room. They just live it. Everybody's snappy. Everybody's tired. The night feels heavy and no one names it. That's a missed opportunity. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is something like, hey, I think we're both fried. I don't think either of us has much left tonight. This feels harder because we're depleted, not because we're against each other. That kind of naming really helps to lower the confusion. It helps both people stop personalizing everything so quickly. Next, we want to protect the alliance. This is huge, right? Because when your kids are gone, it's just the two of you, right? And you got to figure that out. So when you're both running on empty, your marriage is very vulnerable to turning horizontal frustration into relational threat. In other words, life is hard. So suddenly your spouse starts feeling like the problem. That is a very dangerous drift. So one of the best things you can do is consciously reinforce that team. May sound like, hey, we're both tired, but I don't want to turn on you. Hey, look, I know this is a lot. I'm not saying this well, but I know you're carrying a lot too. Look, we'll figure it out, but I need us to stay on the same side. That kind of language matters. It doesn't erase the pressure, but it keeps the pressure from becoming division. And if you're hearing this and you're realizing, yeah, when I'm tired, I stop sounding like a teammate. That's a really important awareness, and I want to congratulate you for that. It's also incredibly workable. These are exactly the kind of patterns and I help dads reshape in my coaching. So third, we want to simplify the moment. One of the biggest mistakes couples make when they're depleted is trying just to solve too much at once. Wrong night. If it's 6:45, everybody's fried, and both adults are hanging by a thread, that is probably not the moment to solve your long-term division of labor, revisit last week's resentment, or have a theology of family roles conversation. Sometimes the wisest move is much smaller. Again, eat that elephant one bite at a time. What needs to happen over the next 30 minutes? What can wait? There's always work to be done. Something I learned in the Army. There's always work to be done. You can spend all night in the office trying to get that stuff done. But you know what? What can wait? What can get dropped? As a leader, what can you delegate? There's another one. What does good enough look like for tonight? Look, that might mean cereal for dinner. No shame. Trust me. That might mean a shorter bedtime routine. That could mean one of you just taps out for 10 minutes while the other one just holds the line. I would have a conversation about that first, though. Don't tell your wife you're going to tap out for 10 minutes, or don't tap out for 10 minutes without letting your wife know. Also, it could mean that, naming that this is a survival night, not a high performance family systems night. All of that is okay. A lot of dads, I want you to hear that. A lot of dads need permission to hear that. It's okay. Just like going on vacation to Costa Rica and having all of these things sort of fall apart and us, accepting them as opportunities. All of that, it's going to happen and that's okay. Not every night has to be, optimized to the nth degree. Some nights just need to be survived without relational damage. That's wisdom. Now, I think it's also important to say this. Sometimes what looks like a conflict problem is actually an unshared load problem. Sometimes the tension is not mainly about attitude. It's about one person carrying too much without enough acknowledgement or support or without relief. That's where curiosity matters a lot. A husband Dad, you may need to ask, what part of your day feels the most relentless right now? Usually it's like that 30 minutes between, when you get home and dinner is on the table. You know, wives may need to ask, hey, what part of work is following you home mentally? This has been true myself. Sometimes, things go bad at work. You fail your team and that comes home and it haunts you. But maybe both of you need to ask, what are we expecting from each other that we have never really actually talked through? Those are much better questions than why are you being like this? Or what is your problem tonight? If the goal is to stay as a team, curiosity will take you much further than accusations. And sometimes you have to be very clear about the intent of your words. Sometimes the words that you say are not the words that, your wife or your child hears. Sometimes I will even say, hey, I'm just making an observation here. And please, I do not want you to hear criticism. And then in very, very honest words, just make an observation. One of the reasons that all of this, this matters so much is because, your kids, they feel the difference between a tired couple who is still allied, who is still a team, and juxtapose that with a tired couple who has just started to turn on each other. They may not understand the details, but they feel the tone. They feel whether dad walking in the door brings partnership or pressure. They feel whether mom and dad are exchanging information or resentment. They feel whether the evening has an underlying spirit of, we're doing this together, or, all right, everybody is on your own. That tone really shapes the whole house. And I don't say that to increase pressure. I say it because it means small shifts in the marriage also have a surprisingly big effect on the family. Let me bring in one more angle from my own life. Because of our role reversal, I've had to experience more directly what it feels like for home life to be its own sort of legitimate form of depletion. That gave me more respect, not less, for the kinds of women and men who carry that work full time. It also reminded me that one of the easiest ways to damage your marriage is to only honor the kind of exhaustion that you personally understand best. That's a problem. If I only validate work exhaustion, I'm going to miss home exhaustion. If I only validate home exhaustion, I may miss that pressure of having to be the provider. If I value only what I can see, I'll underestimate, what my spouse is carrying internally. That's why naming and honoring each other's burden matters so much. Sometimes before you even solve anything, it helps to say something like, look, I can see today took a lot out of you. Hey, I know you're carrying a lot, a lot right now. Hey, how was school today? It looks like it maybe took a bigger toll than it usually does. My wife's a teacher, by the way. Hey, I may not fully understand your version of tired, but I can see that it's real. I can see you carrying it right now. That kind of acknowledgement is fuel. Not enough by itself, but real fuel. Okay, quick word from our sponsor because apparently we still have to pay the bills around here. And as you may or may not know, congratulations, I'm the sponsor. So if this episode feels a little too familiar, if coming home depleted, provider pressure, or trying to stay allied with your wife when you're both exhausted is one of the places you need the most help, that is exactly the kind of work I do with Christian dads every week. If you want support becoming a calmer, steadier, and more connected husband and father under pressure, grab a complimentary coaching call with me through the link in the show notes. All right, back to it. Hey, I want to offer you something simple that may help tonight. By the way, I love doing the ad reads, if you couldn't tell, even though they're my ads. Yeah. So anyway, when you're both running on empty, try this, right? Again, it's a 3-word sequence, as I am wont to do. Notice, name, narrow. Notice what is true. We're both tired. Name it out loud. This feels harder because we're running on low. Then narrow the focus. What do we need for the next 30 minutes? I love that question. That sequence can save you from turning one hard evening into a relational wound. It's simple, but simple is often what works when nobody has much left. And if you're a dad who tends to jump straight from notice to criticism, this sequence is worth practicing. That kind of shift from reactive to intentional is exactly the kind of thing that becomes second nature with repetition and support. So here's your challenge for this week. The next time you and your wife are both running on empty, do not start by solving the whole system. Start by naming reality and protecting the alliance. Start by saying one true sentence like, I think we're both running on empty. Or, hey, I don't want this night to turn us against each other. Then ask one good coaching question. What would help most right now? What absolutely has to happen tonight? And what can wait? That's enough. You do not need a perfect plan. You do need a better next move. And if you realize as you try this, that depletion has become one of the main relational stressors in your marriage, don't ignore that. That's no small thing. Inside my Positive Legacy Academy, this is exactly the kind of thing we work on in real life. How to stay connected and present under pressure. How to stop turning fatigue into conflict. How to lower tension without avoiding real issues. And how to lead at home when work, parenting, and marriage all just feel heavy at once. If that sounds like the kind of support you need, I'd love to invite you to a complimentary coaching call. And that call, we can talk about all of that, where depletion is showing up, how it tends to affect your tone and your presence, and whether coaching with me and a group of other Christian dads would help you move toward that with more clarity and steadiness. Spoiler alert, it will, I promise. You can grab a time through the link in the show notes. Sometimes the most loving thing you can say in a hard season is, I don't know how we're going to get through this. But you know what? We don't have a choice. Not because you're trapped, but because you're committed. And commitment, spoken honestly in a depleted season, can become its own kind of hope. As you look at your week ahead, where do you need to name reality? Protect that alliance and lead your home like a teammate instead of an adversary. Until next time, stay rooted in grace, stay steady in mind and spirit, and keep building your positive legacy with one intentional moment at a time. Talk again next week.